All right, we can go ahead, kick off, and get underway. First, I guess just a couple of housekeeping items, which we'll keep all this short because we do just have 30 minutes today for the webinar. First, to introduce myself, my name is Lucas Long. I am our head of global privacy strategy at InfoTrust. And it is my honor and pleasure to be joined by my colleague, Tyler. I'll let him introduce himself real quick.
Yeah, as you can see at the bottom of the screen, my title is Manager of Emerging Solution Strategy. InfoTrust tried to hide something about me in there. I'm literally a mess, so I talk really fast. If you need me to slow down or repeat something, feel free to engage with the chat. A little bit about myself. I've been in the MarTech analytics industry for 10 years, and I spent the majority of that as an engineer, boots on the ground, and now help work with customers for strategies and look at what things are changing in the market and how we can possibly adapt technology to react to that, which makes me the right guy to be on a webinar like this.
Yes, yes, indeed. Speaking of that, for everyone, as we go through the content today, um, obviously we'll be talking through it. There are a couple of different options, though, that you have. There is the chat as well as the Q&A panel. Please submit any questions or curiosities that you have just as we go through this. We have both of those panels up and are more than happy to kind of divert a little bit or answer questions, especially on the topic areas that we're going through. So let's make it interactive, let's make it fun, and let's get into it. So today we will be speaking about foundation for growth. So how to optimize data architecture for media enablement and what exactly does that data architecture look like? So for this, I don't need to go into this too much. I know this is talked about ad nauseum, just in terms of the different external factors that are impacting marketing, advertising, data collection as of today. So regulatory changes, obviously limiting or placing obligations on organizations for the collection and processing of personal information, user expectations growing around their privacy, individuals' privacy, as well as what information can and should be collected and for what purposes should it be used. And then we have technical signal loss due to limitations on access to third-party cookies, as well as duration restrictions for first-party cookies. I like to think about all of these things as external winds of change that can obviously impact a lot of our different activities, especially can impact the architectures and the things that are necessary in strategy for data collection. So when we talk about data collection architecture, we're going to use a very often used metaphor as we go through things today. We're building essentially a house. We're building a structure within which we can start to throw a party, have a lot of do cool things, get to a lot of good insights, start activating. So our house that we are kind of targeting or that we're building, what we're going to do is walk through the different components here and some of the core principles and things to be aware of to be able to make this really strong. So to start, I'm sure everyone's familiar with the parable of the two men kind of building houses. And the first individual does things not in the proper way, and he builds his house on sand. So an unsound foundation. And when those external winds of change that we talked about earlier come, it crumbles. Well, in our case, building your house on cookies is that sand. It's unstable foundation that a lot of organizations have built their advertising, marketing, data collection, and their architectures around, reliant upon third-party platforms, which are reliant upon third-party cookies in order to be able to provide reporting, insights, audience creation, all of that good stuff. So if we want to build our house, what should we be building on? And as kind of a little aside, I know that the house is Halloween themed, one as a sign of the times, but also because of the scary, cool things that we're going to be able to do as a result of this architecture. So building our scary cool house on a solid foundation. In our context here, that solid foundation is going to be first-party data. The information that our organization collects directly from users and directly about users in order to be able to drive our insights, understand behavior, understand performance, as well as inform all of our targeting and advertising types of activities. So to build this sound structure on this sound foundation, what are the different concepts and the things that we need to keep in mind? Well, first, we need a big rock. We need a solid place upon which to build our structure and build our architecture. And that big rock in this kind of metaphor is optimizing and maximizing our first party data. If we don't have much, then we can't really build too much. The more data that we have, the more useful data that we have, the kind of better position that we're going to be in. And how I like to position this is focusing on optimizing the privacy experience for our consumers. Consumers that have trust in your brand, that have visibility and comfort with what information is being collected and how it's being used are going to be more likely to provide that information to you. So some kind of core principles, key principles around this and for optimizing the privacy experience. We want to be able to have sound, solid, very transparent visibility into what is being collected, how it's being used, why it's being collected, all of that. Some of these are regulatory kind of requirements, but also it's what users expect. One thing I always like to kind of cite here, Google and Ipsos did a study around privacy by design last year. In both Europe as well as the Americas, over 40% of respondents said that they would switch from a first choice brand to a second choice brand if that second choice brand provided a much better privacy experience. So provide that better privacy experience, gain better consumer trust, collect more and better quality first party information.
I'll jump in a little bit here too, Lucas. You can continue on, but I just want to make a point here that's it's kind of like a 1,000-foot view. Like, why is this happening? Because it's interesting to think like we need this new foundation. What we're really talking about is identity fidelity. We've had these cookies that would let us know who someone is, and now we're shifting marketing use cases to say, hey, we've known who everyone is and we can make decisions because we always know who they are and we know different behaviors and we've understood, and that's service decisions we made. And now the decisions that we are able to make are somewhat shifting, and the way we get data to make those decisions is somewhat shifting. And at the forefront of all of that is the privacy that Lucas is talking about. So, and able to negotiate these identities, to be able to make the decisions we made before, you need to use these techniques. But also what is very important for this rock is to understand, anticipate what decisions will I be able to make, what data can I collect, and make sure that what I'm putting into this new foundation that was previously led by a technology that's slowly diminishing is able to withstand these privacy regulations and be able to inform good decisions. So that's where like privacy strategy plus data strategy meets for a really good foundation. And both of those arms are incredibly important because you don't want to collect data for data's sake. You want to collect data with a purpose and a decision in mind. And you want to make sure that you're able to collect that data. Please, Lucas.
No, excellent segue. We have the first party data. That is our strong foundation. We maximize it in order to be able to have a big, solid kind of place upon which to build that architecture. Our second step is actually establishing the foundation. So exactly what Tyler was alluding to there, or really explicitly stating there, we have to have a purpose and a strategy for when we begin to dig down into that foundation or into our first party data. And that is going to allow us to really mold and build out that foundation that we can then build from. And so what does this kind of mean? Well, with our first party data, we have to, again, as Tyler mentioned, define the requirements. What is our purpose? What are we planning to do with that information? What are we trying to get out of it? Identifying various different data sources. Where does our first party data live? Where can we access that? How can we pull that all in? And then making sure that we have sound standards and governance for the structure of that information, taxonomies that are used, nomenclatures, key values, everything needs to be standardized across all of our different systems in order to be able to harmonize it and really build from there. Within the web context, this is organizing everything within a data layer to be able to make it easily accessible and collectible, as well as for performance information, making sure that external kind of visits and things like that are coming to our website, we have sound UTM, campaign tracking, taxonomies, governance around those as well. It's all about setting the table, digging down into that source, shall we say, of first-party data in order to be able to mold it such that we can then start to build our structure. Tyler, I know you work quite a bit with organizations around kind of defining taxonomies, instituting and maintaining governance. I guess any like key pieces or key strategies that you always recommend organizations to use in order to be able to do this the right way?
Yeah, start with a purpose is always going to be, which is in line with what the slide is trying to tell us to do. What is the goal of what you're doing and why you're measuring it? And also, more measurement's not always good. Have the idea of what you want to collect. So when you're governing, what are the key things that we need to measure on the website? What are the events that we have? And what is our technology that we are able to enable to enforce that, right? When we're thinking about governance. Are we collecting things we shouldn't be collecting? Are our events matching our event standard? And do we have the technology to both document what those standards are and enforce them in real time? Are the types of questions that people need to be asking. And once you have that, that makes everything downstream much more simple because we know what data we're collecting. We know what purpose it's for. We know what we're allowed to collect, and we can evolve that plan over time. As long as we're anticipating our needs, the measurement will always answer them. And that's the place that you get put in. And I will allude to this later, but also in a world where identity fidelity is maybe not as good as it used to be, a lot of these become infinitely more important, such as UTMs and measuring what's going on at a macro level rather than the micro level. We're very used to this individual level, but you can still keep UTM tracking in some cases completely anonymous. I know where people are coming from, I just don't know who they are. And now that starts to allow us to make certain decisions on more of a macro level. So understanding the purpose of what all of this is for, that this isn't just understanding multi-touch for an individual user, but it's also looking at what's happening in marketing in the aggregate. And how do I start to think about those? And what modeling techniques does that allow me to do to understand gaps I may have as identity fidelity falls through the cracks?
Excellent points. And all of that, our identity fidelity, our standards, our purpose, all of that builds out that foundation.
Yep.
So now that we have the foundation kind of established, and we need to build the walls of our structure. And the walls, what's really keeping everything upright and is also kind of protecting and allowing for the cool stuff that will happen inside later, is optimizing the collection architecture for data that is being collected, behavioral data from web, app, all of those different data sources. So what are the kind of key concepts here when we're thinking about the collection architecture? Two things that I really like to try to drive home for organizations. And the first one is expanding the conception of first-party data. Oftentimes, we only think about first-party data as that which is input in forms and provided to us, or that which we are collecting in terms of like behavioral information that we're collecting through something like web analytics or through ad tech platforms that are loading across our websites that are indicating user interactions or page loads, those types of things. Organizations should also look at all of their advertising media data that is sitting inside of those different third-party platforms that is generated as a result of the execution of campaigns as their first-party data. You paid for it to be generated, it's yours. And so this goes back to even some of those foundations and the standards and the taxonomies. Standardize all of that across all those platforms, which then allows you to ingest that information. And so you can start to have better insights cross-channel for performance, as well as return types of calculations. So expanding that conception of what is our first-party data and making sure that we have those standards and everything applied across all of them. So now we're talking about collection architecture that is both collection from users and their touch points with our organization, as well as ingestion from other types of platforms in order to be able to build out that full data set. Now, one way, and for say most organizations, kind of the best way to facilitate all of that is with server-side data collection, server-side tag management, or sometimes we'll refer to it as server-side data distribution, which confers a number of different benefits. And this is one area where we'll kind of dive into with the visual. So with client-side data collection, thinking about this for typical third-party tags, things that you have deployed on a website, all that data is being collected and sent up to third-party platforms directly from the user's browser. Now, this has some drawbacks. We have less visibility into data because we're being blocked by things like ad blockers. It's not that secure, and it's not that scalable as well when we're starting to talk about collecting more sensitive data and personal information from users. And it also represents a heightened compliance risk because we have no control over exactly what data is being collected there. Compare this with the server-side setup where we're sending the data to our owned organizational server that is then distributed to our third-party platforms, which allows us to have full control over the end-to-end collection, improvement in data visibility, and then that all can lead, and we can also just do cooler things. We can start plugging in other data sources to be able to enrich, enhance, fix data in flight, which again, as we start to expand that conception of our first party data, this can confer quite a few benefits. Tyler, again, I know you've set this up and kind of consulted with a number of organizations for the best ways of going about this. Any kind of thoughts on one, the server-side architecture, but also pulling in from other data sources and kind of plugging that in to this type of a setup?
Yeah, I'll answer this. Lucas, if you want to prep, we also have a question in chat that we can look at while I'm going through this. One of the things I like to explain why this works, because a question that I so often get with this is like, okay, so we put a proxy now between we're sending to our server and then that server sends and it has these security benefits and right, but how long until that's figured out, or how long until that doesn't work, right? And they like, is this really a fix? And I'd like to explain what it is really that we're talking about with server side and why it's able to do what it's doing. And I have an example that typically drives this home. If you are using an ad blocker or maybe a browser that's blocking connections to third parties or to other places, and you're trying to collect that data, as Lucas said, all that data is very visible. And so those platforms know, block this communication. I don't want you talking to anything but the website you're on. But if I were to visit pizzahut.com and order a pizza for my family, no ad blocker browser in the world is going to say, no, pizzahut.com, you cannot talk to pizzahut.com. You can't send that request to buy that pizza. A server talking to itself is how the internet works. It is technology on it's hard to differentiate. Why is this server talking to itself? What is its purpose? That's a very difficult thing to understand. What we're doing with server side is also putting a first party domain in front of data collection, so that it's no different than Pizza Hut talking to itself. So it might be www.pizzahut.com and data.pizzahut.com. And that information is only traveling to yourself. And that's why it comes with a litany of benefits and increases overall measurement and the security of that measurement. As not only will data no longer be blocked when it shouldn't be blocked, and again, I can never say this enough, consent is very, very important in this case. You'd still want to make sure that you are allowed to collect the data you're collecting. But technology is no longer playing in the middle of saying you can't do this. As long as you have that relationship with the customer, you'll continue to collect that. Also, other technologies that shouldn't be listening to your transaction no longer can listen because we picked it up and put it over here. We sent the data to the server, and only the server is talking to our third-party platforms. So now another third-party piggybacking tag or a platform we're unaware of is no longer involved in this transaction because we separated that out. And there is just a number of benefits that come along with that. One of the main ones people get excited about is we just picked a bunch of code up off the website and put it somewhere else. And that does affect page speed times variably for different customers, but it will be less code on the website, which is always a net good.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a question about just kind of some vendors that are playing in here. When I'm referring to the different touch points and like kind of expanding that conception of first party data, it's all these platforms that are on the screen now, right? It's wherever that type of information is housed for the different third party advertising vendors that you're working with. But that also includes considering things like internal first party data sources like CRM systems where user data might sit. Things like that. And then for server side and distribution, vendors, Google Tag Manager has a server side solution, Telium has a server side solution, MetaRouter, a number of others are out there. And we'll continue to kind of mention some of the vendors with some of these further examples as well.
I have an answer to another question in the chat here, Lucas, before we go on, which is a great question. And it's really about like, what are business use cases of the enrichment? Like when we're talking about the ability to enrich what's going on. So I'll use two examples here, but before to set up the argument, what I want you to think about the data layer on the client side is very public. This is really public information, and anything we do in server side is really private because customers or competitors cannot see. So what information will we want to be public or private? Margin data on products. If I'm selling a product for $8, but it only costs me $1 to make, and then I sell another product that I sell for $8, but it costs me $6 to make, I don't necessarily want the customer to know my markup on those different things. But when reporting on profitability or advertising targeting, it's really important to understand that margin data, and it's often missing when we just do client-side collection. Well, you could just have lookups on server side, and you can enrich all that data with margin data while it's in flight. So that's one thing that you could do that makes a lot more sense in server side. You'd never want that data to be public on the client side. Also, we can access things in the cloud. So if we have things like propensity scores, CLV scores, information about users that are updating in real time, we can actually pick them up while the data is in flight, append it to the data, and distribute it to all other platforms in flight. So rather than saying later, we're going to go build these scores and then we'll get it over to GA360 or LiveRamp or Trade Desk, and now they'll disseminate it from there. While the data is being formed, you'll actually get those scores in platform, which means marketers are using them in real time, not whenever the models are created. So those are two examples of what this unlocks that allow you to be a little bit more agile and start doing things you couldn't do before to make better decisions.
Yep. All excellent examples. Tyler, time check. We have about 5 minutes here for everyone. We have two more kind of principles to get through, which promise that we will. So now we have the walls, we have a foundation, time to construct the roof. And what is the thing that is going to be able to house everything, seal everything off, protect our data? That is going to be a first-party marketing data warehouse. What this is going to be, Tyler will speak much more on this. Protected and secure environment allows us to aggregate all of those different first-party data sources that I mentioned before together using our sound data collection architecture. And because we've taken care of governance, we're able to harmonize and integrate all of that data together so that we can start doing a lot more advanced insight generation on that data. Tyler, I know this is probably your most commonly discussed principle with organizations. Kind of any keys to look out for?
So the one thing that I would say that people, this is always a positive thing and the foundation for everything we've talked about today. So I'm actually going to talk about one of the risks of doing this, which is an important thing to consider, is when you're now taking the burden of data ownership on yourself, DSAR requests, things like, do I need to delete this data? Do I need to know what data I have on my users? You're also taking that burden on. So this is a new foundation that is going to allow you to do all the things I just talked about with server side, advanced modeling use cases, understand single customer view now that identity's gone away. It will have all of these benefits, but also one of the things to consider that I think is worth noting is once you own the data yourself, you also own the responsibility of maintaining that data for your users so that they want you to delete data, understand what they have on it. Make sure you have that capability as well. It's a thing to look out for when you're going down this journey.
Excellent point. The amount of additional compliance benefit that is added by the sound architecture in this type of a setup should not be understated. So we have all those things in place, house is built, structure is in place, but we want to build on top of that. I kind of mentioned before, we have the standards, data is in one place, sound architecture for collection, but we need to make the house a home. And what that is filling it with people and first-party data products that are going to allow us to generate unique insights. Tyler, I'll let you speak to just kind of some of these examples when we're talking about some of these unique insights. And all of these things are things that you can generate, insights you can generate with that first-party data, and then also push back to different platforms for activation.
Yep, these are the real like new age use cases on why we're doing all of this. This is really the cool things. We have a question in chat, and I'll answer Danielle right after I get through this point. And one thing I'll say before I go through each of these is when this change was happening, something I said to reassure people is this is not a step back to pre third-party cookies in the 90s. We are not going back to that old marketing. We have new models. We have AI at our hands. We have better data collection. We have better governance. It is a much better technical world. So when we think about these techniques we can use, they're much better than returning to these old marketing techniques. So what do we mean by that? In a cookie less, meaning less cookies, they're not completely gone. Thank you, Chrome. World, how do we do attribution now? Well, models like regression-based attributions don't rely on cookies, but use statistical models to understand what different marketing tactics are having different effects on your marketing campaign and can even project where you should put future spend. You need data to be able to do this, but that's a very powerful thing to do for marketing. Everybody wants to have this personalization engine. You're going to hear me talk about identity so much. Well, if we know who a user is, and they've given us the ability to track them, we can understand every different touch point that they're having with our brands and tailor messaging to them because we own all that data. And with third-party cookies no longer being able to tell me everything about this user, now I'm able to collect that and make decisions for them. I talked about the enriching modeling streams already in the server side one, so I won't do that one. Centralizing marketing data and single customer view are very, very linked. Let's get all of our data in one place so we can make better decisions and understand how our customers are engaging with us now that we can't rely on platforms to track them universally across the internet. So these are things people are thinking about. And these are also going to be topics of future webinars. I'll let Lucas go into that. Also, I'll answer the question real quick for Danielle. She asked, does SGTM make sense for 100% of companies, or do you have to meet certain thresholds? I'll say specifically server-side GTM is the easiest one that makes sense for almost everybody. A paid server-side product that is as a product license might be something that in order to have the fidelity of what you want it to do, you want to meet certain thresholds because they can be quite expensive sometimes. Server-side GTM is free other than the cloud cost and the cost of implementation. So it's a lower barrier to entry, and the net benefits are almost always going to outweigh what that cost is. However, some of the other ones I would say might have a different answer. And it really depends on every single decision you make in architecture and data. You should understand what the potential outcome or impact on marketing is going to be and justify that decision. But I would say in almost all cases, as long as you're not a very small business, SGTM will be a proper choice.
Nice. So taking all of that together, I know that we are running up on time. We built the house, we filled it, we made it home. Now we can celebrate our competitive advantage that we're able to realize as a result of having our sound architecture, first-party data in one place, insights, all of that good stuff. So that is kind of everything that we have to go through today. As Tyler mentioned, for some of those other use cases, the stuff that you can do once this architecture is in place, We will be continuing our webinar series with the next one talking about attribution and leveraging a lot of these inputs for first-party data for attribution. And then we'll have future webinars speaking to some of those other first-party data use cases for activation as well. So thank you all very, very much for joining us today, and we hope to see you on some of these upcoming webinars.